Nandana Brajajana Ranjana His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Om Vishnu Padma Mahamsa Parivarjagacharya Ashtadasha Shishmad His Divine Grace Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Goswami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Okay. Om Namo Aham Chanya Ime Devas Tasmai Bhagavate Namaha. Please repeat.
Yato prapya nyavartanta vachasya manasa saha aham chanya ime devas Bhagavate Namaha.
Tasmai Bhagavate Namaha.
Yato prapya nyavartanta
Yato prapya nyavartanta
vachascha manasa saha
vachasya manasa saha
aham chanya ime devas
aham chanya ime devas
tasmai bhagavate namaha
tasmai bhagavate namaha.
Yato prapyanya vartanta
Yato prapya nyavartanta
vachas manasa saha
vachasya manasa saha
aham janya ime
aham chanya
devas
ime devas
tasmai bhagavate namaha.
tasmai bhagavate namaha.
Yato prapya nivartanta.
Yato prapya nyavartanta
Vachascha manasa saha.
vachasya manasa saha
Aham chanya ime devas.
aham chanya ime devas
Tasmai Bhagavate Namaha.
tasmai bhagavate namaha. Yato prapya nyavartanta vachasya manasa saha aham chanya ime devas tasmai bhagavate namaha. Yato prapya nyavartanta aham chanya ime devas tasmai bhagavate namaha.
Yataha, from whom? Aprapya,
Yeah,
being unable to measure.
being unable to measure.
Nyavartanta, cease to try.
Cease to try.
Vachaha, words.
Word.
Also, manasa, with the mind. Saha, with. Ahamcha, also the ego. Anye, other. Eme, all these. Devaha, demigods. Tasmai, unto him. Bhagavate, unto the personality of Godhead.
Unto the personality of God.
Namaha, offer obeisances. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Words, mind, and ego, with their respective controlling demigods, have failed to achieve success in knowing the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, we simply have to offer our respectful obeisances unto Him as a matter of sanity. The froggish calculator may raise the objection that if the Absolute is unknowable, even by the controlling deities of speech, mind, and ego, namely the Vedas, Brahma, Rudra, and all the demigods headed by Brihaspati, then why should the devotees be so interested in this unknown object? The answer is that the transcendental ecstasy enjoyed by the devotees in delineating the pastimes of the Lord is certainly unknown to non-devotees and mental speculators. Unless one relishes transcendental joy, naturally one will come back from his speculations and concocting conclusions because he will see them neither as factual nor as enjoyable. The devotees can at least know that the absolute truth is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vishnu, as the Vedic hymns confirm, Om Tad Vishnu Paramam Padam Sada Pashanti Suryaha. Bhagavad Gita also confirms this fact, Vedashta Sarver Aham Eva Vedyaha. By the culture of Vedic knowledge, one must know Lord Krishna and should not falsely speculate on the word aham, or I. The only method for understanding the supreme truth is devotional service. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita, Bhaktya mam abhijanati yavan chasmi tatvataha. Only by devotional service can one know that the ultimate truth is the personality of Godhead, and that Brahman and Paramatma are only his partial features. This is confirmed in this verse by the great sage Maitreya. With devotion, he offers his sincere surrender, namaha, to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Bhagavate. One has to follow in the footsteps of great sages and devotees like Maitreya and Vidura. Maharaj Parikshit and Shukadev Goswami and engage in the transcendental devotional service of the Lord if one would know his ultimate feature, which is above Brahman and Paramatma. Om Agyanatimirandasya Gananjana Shilakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Mano Bhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutali Swayam Rupakada Mayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Tapada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamshta Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Tam Jivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Pada and Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitamshta He Krishna Kurna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpati Gopishaka Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostuti Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhi Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranama Mihari Pri Vansha Kapatu Isha Kripasindu Bhivaja Patita Nam Pavnebhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Putri Shrimate Bhakti Vikasa Swaminiti Namane Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Putri Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Sarasvati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunavadi Pashkyate Ishtarane Bhutira Mahadviri Mafpura Vibor Niramaya Shiti Yadamush Purasha Bhungte Gunan Shudasha Shudashatmaka Sodangashishta Bhagavan Vashamsime. Just give me 1 second. Okay, verse again. Words, mind, and ego, with the respective controlling demigods, have failed to achieve success in knowing the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, we simply have to offer our respectful obeisances unto Him as a matter of sanity. So, there's a common theme as being, well, this chapter, this is the last verse of the chapter, which is called Creation, the Universal Form, and then next chapter, chapter 7, is further inquiries about Vidura. And so the synopsis of this chapter is that how the material ingredients were manifested from the Virat Purusha, the universal form, is described. And then consequently, here in this section, we have a string of verses for the past few days that's talking about directly Krishna, directly, not exactly Virat Purusha, but Virat Rup, but Vishnu himself, that his actions are inconceivable, and he has to be understood. Even Brahma does not understand him. Rudra, he's unknown to the jugglers, and he can't be grasped in today's verse. He can't be grasped. He's unattainable. Aprapya, this word comes. Just like we have prapyasa kalyana, you attain qualities from the spiritual master, or the spiritual master is getting those qualities from the ocean. Here, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is unattainable by vachas manasa, and also ego comes here. Ahamsha, also with the ego. So with words, mind, and ego, and their respective controlling demigods are unable to attain the Supreme Personality of Godhead, in other words. One point is that they become, one interesting word is that nyavartanta, this word elsewhere, it's translated as return. Here, Srila Prabhupada, he translates as cease to try. Literally, although I don't know Sanskrit so well, I'm presuming that because these things are emanating from the Supreme Personality of God, that the senses are emanating, as has been described in this chapter, they're manifested from the Supreme Personality of God. Along with the demigods, they're unable to return in the sense of grasping the Supreme Personality of Godhead like that. So Srila Prabhupada, he translates like this. Therefore, we simply have to offer obeisances, respectful obeisances unto Him as a matter of sanity. And then a few points Srila Prabhupada brings out. One, I'll just gloss over quickly. One of the if the Vedas, Brahma, Rudra, etc., can't understand the Supreme Personality of God, why did the devotees try to bother? Because it seems like the object is unknowable. Srila Prabhupada clarifies that the Supreme Personality of God, to an extent, is knowable, but the transcendental ecstasy enjoyed by the devotees in delineating the pastimes of the Lord is certainly unknown to non-devotees and mental speculators. So that's one clarification here. And then he continues to the second point, which we've been discussing. The only method for understanding the supreme truth is devotional service, as is stated in Bhagavad Gita, Bhaktiyamam abhijanati yavan yaschasmi tatvataha. Only by devotional service can one know that the ultimate truth is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Otherwise, one doesn't make advancement. One can't know Krishna, in other words. There's a series of verses. It's reiterated throughout the Bhagavatam. I'll just take over because I want to display some things. You see in Brahma's prayers in the 10th canto, 14th chapter, practically the whole point of his prayers, more or less. There's so many verses in succession that describe this. This is just one. I won't go through the Sanskrit because I don't know it. He says, "My Lord, if one is favored by even a slight trace of the mercy of your lotus feet, He can understand the greatness of your personality. But those who speculate to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead are unable to know you, even though they continue to study the Vedas for many years. When Lord Chaitanya had entered Puri, Jagannath Puri, and when he was staying at the house of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya was inquiring about who Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was to Gopinath Acharya. And Gopinath Acharya, he replied, quoting this verse to Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. And he said that only when you're favored by the mercy of Lord Chaitanya will you understand who he is. I'm paraphrasing, but this verse is quoted there. Another verse from Lord Brahma, a more famous one. Jananta eva janantu kim bahuktya name prabho manaso vapusho vacho vaibhavam tavagocharaha. There are people who say, I know everything about Krishna. Let them think that way. As far as I'm concerned, I do not wish to speak very much about this matter. O my Lord, let me say this much. As far as your opulences are concerned, they are all beyond the reach of my mind, body, and words. So the same thing comes this manaso vapasho vacho, a similar thing here. Today we have vachas cha manasasaha aham chanya, along with false ego. So very similar. So Lord Brahma is expressing this. This is expressed many times in the Bhagavatam. Any prayers you see in the Bhagavatam, it more or less reiterates this point, the inconceivable nature of Krishna. So Krishna is inconceivable. His incarnations are inconceivable. His desires are inconceivable. Everything about him is inconceivable. His plans are also inconceivable. It's difficult to understand exactly although Krishna comes to this world to reestablish Dharma, and in one sense, you could take that as Krishna's plan. It's still very difficult to understand Krishna's intention to know his plan, even though he states it. Srila Prabhupada in the Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavad Gita 11:34. So Krishna is telling Arjuna that all these warriors are already killed by me, therefore just perform your duty. And then Srila Prabhupada in his purport, he says, every plan is made by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but he is so kind and merciful to his devotees that he wants to give the credit to his devotees, who carry out his plan according to his desire. Life should therefore move in such a way that everybody acts in Krishna consciousness and understands the Supreme Personality of Godhead through the medium of a spiritual master. The plans of the Supreme Personality of Godhead are understood by his mercy, and the plans of his devotees are as good as his plans. One should follow such plans and be victorious in the struggle for existence. So a few points of this purport. One that we've covered before, that the plans of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, I spoke in a verse like this a week ago, they're understood through the spiritual master. The spiritual master is the via media through which we interact with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, through which we understand what Krishna wants and how to act within spiritual life. And the plans of the spiritual master, or the devotee, the pure devotee, are as good as his plans, or Krishna's plans. Means the devotee, the spiritual master, his plan is not different from Krishna's plan. The devotee simply takes Krishna's plan, and continues that and imparts that to his disciples. He doesn't change it. Another aspect is that the devotee, Krishna's plans being inconceivable, the devotee's plans to an extent are also of the same nature because they are of the same quality. Just as it's difficult to understand the plans of Krishna, it's difficult to understand the plans of a pure devotee. Just as it's difficult to understand Krishna's activities, it's also difficult to understand the activities of a Vaishnava. We have this verse, which I don't know the Bengali for, Vaishnava Kriya Mudra, something na pujai. One can't understand just by external observation the activities of a Vaishnava. Though we should try to, nevertheless. So, so main thing I want to cover, because I think the speakers have been speaking generally on the inconceivable nature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So I want to speak a little on the nature of the spiritual master, because Krishna is to be understood through the spiritual master. And even Srila Prabhupada is writing through this verse that Maitreya, he understood these topics of Krishna through Vidura. Vidura understood these topics of Krishna through Maitreya. So similarly, Parikshit through Shukadeva Goswami. So, in terms of understanding the spiritual master, well, one thing, so, yeah, just as Krishna's plans are inconceivable, Krishna's plans are vast, so too are the plans of the spiritual master. Specifically, Srila Prabhupada, he gave so many different programs, he wanted so many different things from his disciples, and it's difficult to understand. Although one defining characteristic of Srila Prabhupada, you could say, is that he made things very simple, and he put things in very clear-cut terms. Nevertheless, some discrepancies it can be hard to understand exactly what he wanted in some places. For example, if you look at his letters in different places, as is known to us, he emphasized things. He called multiple programs the most important activity. He called, this book distribution is the most important activity in the society. In another place, he said, now we should try for making life members. This is the most important activity in the society. Prasad distribution, so similarly to street chanting. There's many different letters. Srila Prabhupada, he qualifies as the most important activity within his society. So similarly too, sometimes we see that, sometimes in terms of understanding exactly what the spiritual master wants, in terms of understanding the spiritual master, sometimes the spiritual master, or Srila Prabhupada, I would take it specifically, he acted in such a way to where he obscured his real motive, and that his real motive wasn't clear by his external activities. What that practically means. Once, Mitravan Prabhu, within My Glorious Master, he relates an incident where he pressured Srila Prabhupada into allowing the use of guitars in kirtan, even though Srila Prabhupada clearly didn't want to do so. This is known to us, but nevertheless, Srila Prabhupada conceded. Does that mean using guitars in kirtan is an acceptable standard? No, even though Srila Prabhupada allowed it then, no. Mitravan Prabhu, he later reflected on this. He says, our spiritual master may sometimes agree to our requests because we present them forcefully, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's Krishna's desire. We should be careful that our own enthusiastic vision does not cover our ability to recognize our guru's actual desires. So it's possible for a disciple to superimpose his own desires, or try to push, rather, his own desires on the spiritual master. And the spiritual master may concede to the disciple. Not that the spiritual master comes under the control of the disciple, rather he doesn't want the disciple to go away or become discouraged. We see this particularly in Srila Prabhupada's early preaching. Similarly to another instance, Srila Prabhupada, I think in 1975 or 76, there's a letter, Srila Prabhupada, two female disciples, somewhere on the West Coast. They moved out of the temple, they had some issues with temple authorities, and they wanted to start their own ashram, women's only ashram. And they wrote Srila Prabhupada proposing this idea. Srila Prabhupada wrote back, he encouraged them to set up this ashram. He told them, yes, but do not make a large program. You should live a very, very humble and simple life. And he encouraged them in this way, that you can go on and gather women of the fair sex to come and join you there. So he was encouraging these two female disciples, yet on the same day that he wrote this letter to the GBC of the region, he wrote, they want to live independently, that is their defect. A woman cannot live independent. According to the Vedic culture, a woman is always to be protected by a man. So Srila Prabhupada instructed one disciple one way, and then he made clear his actual desire to the GBC of the area, his actual thoughts. So I'm just saying this to make the point without getting into minute functions, that exactly what the spiritual master wants is not always exactly so clear-cut and straightforward, even by necessarily what he may be directly speaking. The context has to be seen. Just like, and certain things the spiritual master says is relevant for time, place, circumstance, and is not to be carried. Some things are meant to be perpetuated into eternity, just like Srila Prabhupada set 16 rounds as a standard for a society. And of course, the philosophy of Krishna consciousness as well, but other things are not. Just like we see Srila Prabhupada, when his disciples first went to India, when they were going on Harinam Sankirtan, they were receiving a poor reception. I was just reading about that yesterday. And people were throwing money at them, like some small value, like coins at the devotees, thinking they were beggars. When Srila Prabhupada heard of this, he became disturbed, and he actually stopped the devotees from going on street Sankirtan in India, instead directing them to make life members, approach the intelligent class of society. So Srila Prabhupada stopped Sankirtan in India. Yet, and factually, it didn't really go on during Srila Prabhupada's time. Yet, although we don't have an explicit order from spiritual master saying so, it's not that Sankirtan in India is banned ad infinitum, because the Sankirtan is the Yuga Dharma. So, although it's an order from the spiritual master, we can understand it's not to be carried on ad infinitum. So similarly too, there's so many different things we could get into in terms of understanding explicitly the desire of the spiritual master. It's difficult to do. We have, some of us, I'm sure, have our own experience in dealing with our own respective spiritual masters. Sometimes we think the spiritual master, we approach him with a question or advice or just anything what to do, and we think he will react in one way or reply in one way, but he may give a completely opposite reply than the stereotyped reply we're expecting within our minds. Just like, for example, in Atlanta, I think, Srila Prabhupada was asked, Srila Prabhupada, what service pleases you the most? The devotee was expecting that Srila Prabhupada would answer that you distribute my books. But Srila Prabhupada replied famously that something along the lines of, you develop love for Krishna, or you love Krishna. That will please me the most. So, we should understand this and not misapply. The central point is not misapplying just as people misapply their own material conceptions to Krishna. People misunderstand Krishna in terms of his activities, his rasa lila, why he came to this world. You see people, they think Krishna is sinful for having encouraged the battle of Kurukshetra. They think he's immoral for having danced with the gopis. So similarly too, although maybe not along the exact same lines, it's possible to apply our own misunderstanding to the desires and actions of the spiritual master and think that, specifically, that the spiritual master may act in such a way, or if he was here now, he may advise in such a way. Just like we see, there are different people who have the certain opinions of Srila Prabhupada specifically. They think if Srila Prabhupada was here now, he would change his view on certain matters. He may have, he may not have, but Srila Prabhupada didn't give such views, nor did he write about such theoretical things. We simply have to accept what the spiritual master says and act on that. Otherwise, that's exactly how deviation comes about, which Srila Prabhupada used different words to describe: over-intelligent, manufacturing, speculation, American disease. So otherwise, all these things can come about. It might be presumed that those devotees, or those people in general, but specifically devotees who relate with the spiritual master directly, who have a direct relationship with the spiritual master, not only as their spiritual master and the relationship with the spiritual master, but also seeing the spiritual master as a friend, as a spiritual father, something like this. They must surely know them better than those who served at a distance and never spoke with him. Many disciples of Srila Prabhupada, they never had his association, and many never actually even spoke with him. However, Srila Prabhupada, he writes, the mercy of the bona fide spiritual master is there equally for everyone. So it's not necessarily that because one is interacting with the spiritual master more, is more favored by him, or he understands the desires of the spiritual master more. It seems a little counterintuitive, because according to worldly sense at least, we think like that if you know somebody, the more you associate with somebody, the more you're around somebody, the more you know about them. You can predict what they won't. So too, wouldn't it seem that the spiritual master's intentions are best known by those who directly associate with him and directly speak with him and directly have discourse with him? Could be, could not be. Several of Srila Prabhupada's disciples, for example, of Srila Prabhupada, we see his servants, the early disciples who joined Srila Prabhupada's movement. They saw how Srila Prabhupada dealt with many different situations, many different variegated situations, and how he practically applied the philosophy of Krishna consciousness in practical day-to-day life. Two, many of them were personally instructed by Srila Prabhupada in terms of the philosophy, in terms of Vaishnava behavior, in terms of management, in terms of so many things. Srila Prabhupada gave them personal training. Yet, two, we see many of them went away after Srila Prabhupada disappeared and left the planet, or suffered issues in their own devotional lives. which indicates that although they had extensive association with the spiritual master, with Srila Prabhupada specifically, they hadn't fully assimilated his message and fully understood what he actually wanted. Just as the Kurus, even, to give a direct example, they also had the association of Krishna. They were around Krishna. Krishna was there, but the Pandavas were specifically favored by Krishna. Although Duryodhana was aware of Krishna, he even saw Krishna's universal form. He couldn't understand Krishna. So similarly too, just by being around the spiritual master, etc., like that, is not a qualification necessarily for understanding him. So yeah, I was speaking, many disciples went away. The real disciple is one who follows the order of the spiritual master. We see in the 4th canto, Srila Prabhupada writes, to paraphrase, that the disciple, when the spiritual master departs, a chaotic situation ensues, but the real disciples try to rectify the situation by following the orders of the spiritual master. So we see this with Srila Prabhupada himself, and the disappearance of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, so much chaos ensued, and the Gaudiya Math split up. But nevertheless, Srila Prabhupada, simply by sticking to the order of his spiritual master, he created a society. He perpetuated the Krishna consciousness movement. Even though Srila Prabhupada had not so much direct association with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, I'll speak on that a little bit later. Shivaram Maharaj, he wrote, or he spoke actually, he said, "I've seen many devotees who, after countless hours of association with Srila Prabhupada, who had been his secretary, cook, and traveling companion, abandoned his service and compromised the principles of Krishna consciousness." It happens, there's many different accounts, even to ludicrous degrees. There was one devotee who was Srila Prabhupada's secretary, and he later took sannyas, and he was later caught drying marijuana within the oven of a temple's kitchen. So, of course, they're all glorious souls, and their service to Srila Prabhupada is glorious and eternal, but one's devotional standing is indicative of his appreciation of the spiritual, indicative of his assimilation of the spiritual master's message. Srila Prabhupada, he himself gave the example of a king sitting on a throne and the mosquito coming and sucking blood from him. The mosquito may be sitting on the arm of the king, and that would be very close to the king, but he's not actually helping the king. Rather, he's actually just hurting the king. So similarly, too, it's possible for somebody to have close association with the spiritual master, to be close physically to the spiritual master, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's dear to the spiritual master or that he's even helping him. Indeed, it was the devotees who had much direct association with Srila Prabhupada, as glorious as they are, and much direct guidance from Srila Prabhupada, his most trusted men in his movement, who, just after Srila Prabhupada's disappearance, were responsible for leading the movement into disaster, despite so much training and instruction by Srila Prabhupada. And certainly, Srila Prabhupada's early disciples, they were much loved by Srila Prabhupada, and we're all indebted to their service, which they did to establish the Krishna consciousness movement. There are so many things in terms of renting storefronts, establishing temples, distributing back the Godhead in the streets, going on Harinam Sankirtan, dealing with an otherwise unfavorable public, and especially police, purchasing large properties, just as, for example, Dayananda Prabhu, he purchased that temple property in Los Angeles, which is still there today. Purchasing property in India and developing it, getting the land in Mayapur, living in the rice fields in Mayapur and developing it. Or to speak of those devotees who were living on the property in Bombay along with what Giriraj Swami describes as rats the size of rabbits and huge cockroaches, and what Gargamuni Prabhu, he describes as an area that was basically just sewage lands. There was a horrible smell coming from the area. There was no clean water. It was basically a jungle. So they lived in such an area, and now you go there today. I was just showing Rishi Kumar Prabhu, and somebody else was there. I think Avaduta Chandra, I forget. If you look up Mumbai, which is Bombay, renamed, if you look up Mumbai on a map, and Google Maps or anything, you know how you zoom into the map, it shows you like the big like attractions, it shows you like the gateway to India and like all these, the airport. One of the 5 things that you see if you zoom into Mumbai now is Ganjuhu. It's amazing. Although that area, it wasn't even part of Mumbai, practically, it was an hour away. Today, by Srila Prabhupada's vision, is developed into something very wonderful. So by the hardships of his disciples, by the hardships of his early devotees, and establishing the movement that made religious history and established ISKCON for all of us to take advantage of. Nevertheless, all these achievements, as magnificent as they are, don't necessarily privilege these devotees with special access to understanding Srila Prabhupada's mission or to understanding his desires. One disciple who had much direct association with Srila Prabhupada, in the early days of the movement, she expressed one, I quoted this before, but I would just reiterate because it's very amazing to me. Of course, we understand Srila Prabhupada said, "I'll live forever in my books," as he told when a reporter. "What's there in my books is personal instruction," he told another disciple who was looking for such personal instruction. "Everything I've given in my books." Srila Prabhupada spoke in 1977, shortly before he left this world. Nevertheless, one early disciple, she says, "For those devotees who had no personal association with Srila Prabhupada," he said, "I am present in my books." A complete misunderstanding of what Srila Prabhupada taught. Another early disciple, almost as if this in defiance of Srila Prabhupada's teachings, declared, "All the printed pages cannot outshine the glories of your personality." Another early disciple, "Your books aren't the same as you, Srila Prabhupada. I'd take you of your books any day." This disciple expressed that it was like the difference between studying incredible recipes and cooking an incredible meal. One more, Srila Prabhupada's teachings are as beneficial as knowing him as a person. What he said is as important as his personality. So it's indicative that all these are all early disciples. I mean, they joined 66, 67, 68 with extensive association with Srila Prabhupada. Nevertheless, and did amazing things actually for Srila Prabhupada. Nevertheless, we see that they have some discrepancy in understanding exactly what Srila Prabhupada, his teachings, actually. Because Srila Prabhupada very clearly taught that association with the spiritual master is not vapu, or physical association. That's also there. It's not that we discard vapu. But principally through vani, or spiritual instruction, the words of the spiritual master, the instructions of the spiritual master. Principally, among Srila Prabhupada's Vani, the most important thing, there's so many things Srila Prabhupada left, his books, or lectures, conversations, letters. Then we have remembrances, biographies, so many sources are there for accessing Srila Prabhupada, specifically accessing the words of the spiritual master. But specifically with Srila Prabhupada, what he considered the core of his Vani are his books. Srila Prabhupada is to be understood principally through that way. Other things are also there. It's not that we discard those things. We see particularly in Srila Prabhupada's letters, we find many instructions not present in his books, particularly in regards to management and how to run the society, guidance in one's own personal life. Srila Prabhupada dealing with many different situations. But the study of his books has to be there. And Srila Prabhupada can be best known by those devotees who seriously accept his mercy, or rather attempt to accept his mercy by studying his books, following those instructions in his books, and taking those words in his books as their life and soul, as Srila Prabhupada did with his own spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. Unarguably, before, just I was speaking before, Srila Prabhupada had limited opportunities to associate with his own spiritual master. I think in one lecture or conversation he says maybe 10 days, no more than 10, 11 days, something like that, Srila Prabhupada associated with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. Of course, it was over the course of years, but physically not so much. Nevertheless, Srila Prabhupada undoubtedly knew the heart and mind of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur perfectly and much better than any of his godbrothers. Srila Prabhupada was the best disciple of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, undoubtedly. And he understood his desire more than those disciples who had lived with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur day and night for years on end, and who later took up the organization of Srila Bhakti, or the Gaudiya Math that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur founded. We see there's one, anyway, so many things are there. What specifically comes to mind, there's one disciple who was with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, even from before he established the Gaudiya Math, means in from 1910, around there, roughly, to late 1930s. In the late 1930s, he eventually went away, at least temporarily, and pursued something like a Babaji life. at the expressed displeasure of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, in writing a letter to him, he would express his very great displeasure with him, despite the fact that this disciple had so much association with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. Specifically, he had disobeyed his order. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, he told him not to read a book, and he read the book anyway, but these are tangential details. So, Srila Prabhupada in Chaitanya Charitamrita, elaborating on this, Adi Leela 12:8, is a long purport. It's quite famous for those who read the Chaitanya Charitamrita. It's talking about Advaitacharya and his sons. How some became later, some were Sar and some were Asar, or some sons of Advaitacharya were useful and other sons were useless. So, I'll just read some from Srila Prabhupada's purport. The words Daivira Karan indicate that by dint of providence or by God's will, the followers of Advaita Acharya divided into two parties. Such disagreement among the parties of one Acharya is found among the members of the Gaudiya Math. In the beginning, during the presence of Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajaka Acharya Ashtottara Shata Shishmad Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur Prabhupada, all the disciples worked in agreement, but just after his disappearance, they disagreed. One party strictly followed the instructions of Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, but another group created their own concoction about executing his desires. Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, at the time of his departure, requested all of his disciples to form a governing body and conduct missionary activities cooperatively. He did not instruct a particular man to become the next Acharya, but just after his passing away, his leading secretaries made plans without authority. We're talking about understanding the plans of Krishna, understanding the plans of the spiritual master. They made plans without authority to occupy the post of the Acharya, and they split into two factions over who the next Acharya would be. Consequently, both factions were Asar, or useless, because they had no authority, having disobeyed the order of the spiritual master. Despite the spiritual master's order to form a governing body and execute the mission activities of the Gaudiya Math, the two unauthorized factions begin litigation that is still going on after 40 years with no decision. And, this is from there's a string of purports like this, but I'll just extract a little bit. A conclusion: persons who strictly follow the orders of the spiritual master, oh Lord. Persons who strictly follow the orders of the spiritual master are useful in executing the will of the Supreme, whereas persons who deviate from the strict order of the spiritual master are useless. So a very succinct definition. It simply hinges on following the orders of the spiritual master. Less sincere disciples of the spiritual master may be sincere. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati Thakur, he himself spoke, the actual teachings of a prophet are followed no more than a very small minority of his professed followers. Just like we see Jesus, for example, what he taught and what the amount of people who are factually following him, very, very, very few. So many things, so many prophets you can analyze. So, like this. So, understanding of the spiritual master, I'm just reiterating this point, is to be done by studying his life, studying his instructions, and adhering to them, and is not necessarily dependent upon one's personal instruction by the spiritual master or personal association with the spiritual master. In fact, it's possible that somebody who had who wasn't even in, has no direct physical connection with the spiritual master to understand the spiritual master best. Just as we see in the case of Jayatirtha, Acharya Jayatirtha, who comes in the Madhva Sampradaya. Jayatirtha, he came 50 years, something like that, after, or he was prominent 50 years or so after Madhvacharya had left the planet. So he was in the Sampradaya, but he had no physical connection with Madhvacharya. Nevertheless, Madhvas, they accept the works of Jayatirtha, his commentaries, as the authoritative explanation of Madhvacharya's commentaries. Even though Jayatirtha had no direct not connection, but association with Jayatirtha. So, the essence is understanding the intention of the spiritual master through his Vani. So I've spoken about this Vani or Vapu. Another point, so devotees who can attain a clear understanding of exactly who Srila Prabhupada is. We're talking about understanding Krishna, understanding the personality of Krishna, plans of Krishna, etc., everything about Krishna. So similarly to understanding Srila Prabhupada is to be done by who he is, why he came to this world, what he wants from his disciples, is to be done by careful study of his books and by applying the teachings therein. Of course, even by doing so, it requires an attitude of submission and service. Just like we see scholars also study the books of Srila Prabhupada, and even some scholars have the association with Srila Prabhupada. They met Srila Prabhupada directly. But that doesn't while they may be favorable towards the movement, towards Srila Prabhupada, that doesn't necessarily mean they're qualified as a pure disciple of Srila Prabhupada or anything close to that. So all things must be there. Understanding the instructions and also practically rendering service. Immersing oneself in the mission of the spiritual master, being well informed about it, is not possible to know the glories of the spiritual master extensively, and when one extent is not possible to even know the plans of the spiritual master fully, just like we see Srila Prabhupada, he wanted to take over the world with Krishna consciousness. Well, even without speaking about that, he wanted to reestablish Varnashram Dharma. How to do that, the extent how to do that, is difficult to understand. So many questions are there because we don't fully understand Srila Prabhupada's plan. Srila Prabhupada wanted to take over the world with Krishna consciousness. What does that mean? He wanted to make Mayapur a separate country. He wanted to make Mauritius into Fiji as well as also Manipur. He envisioned making them into Krishna conscious nations. How is that possible? I don't know. It's difficult to fully understand, just as it's difficult to fully understand that the plan of Krishna is difficult to fully grasp the complete plan of the spiritual master. Nevertheless, just as we're enjoined to understand Krishna as far as possible, we should similarly understand the desires of the spiritual master as far as possible, or at least the essence. Just as we have Janma Karma Chame Divyam Evam Yovete Tatvataha, one should understand the divine activities of Krishna's birth and appearance in this world. In one sense, it's impossible to do so. We're enjoined to do something impossible, but we can do so by understanding the essence of it. So similarly, too, by understanding the essence or import of the spiritual master. So yes, Srila Prabhupada, he's to be known through his Vani, and he bestows realization and reciprocation with a devotee's service and surrender. Not just Srila Prabhupada, any spiritual master, our own spiritual master. The same principle applies. There are no barriers of time, time or place between a disciple and the spiritual master. Anybody, therefore, can avail of the instructions of the spiritual master and serve him in that way. And one important point is that just as we're reading here, that Maitreya is speaking, I believe. I don't think he's quoting from anybody. That simply we have to offer our respectful obeisances unto him as a matter of sanity. Why are our obeisances offered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead? Because one thing is that we can't fully understand him. As a matter of sanity, we simply offer him obeisances. Another thing is that by the act of offering obeisances, we qualify ourselves in submission, specifically, not just the external show. We qualify ourselves to receive the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Otherwise, just by a dry study of Krishna's life and Krishna's teachings, it is not possible to understand Krishna. One has to be favored by Krishna, as Lord of Brahma is speaking, as also is being spoken here. So, by being favored by the spiritual master, ultimately, one can understand what he wants. By receiving the blessings and mercy of the spiritual master, one can then understand exactly what he wants, his mood and mission. So, consequently, we can become dear to the spiritual master. And then to Krishna, by rendering service to him with surrender. So, I can end my class there and take any questions anybody has at this point, or objections or otherwise. Yes.
So, in Harishwari Prabhu's Transcendental Diary, there's this conversation that Srila Prabhupada has with a reporter in New York named Kevin. Kevin asks, Srila Prabhupada, but in the same way that Krishna says He'll provide for your needs, you must still work to achieve whatever Krishna is giving you. Yes, Prabhupada interjected. You work for Krishna, you have to work to get your necessities. Then Kevin asks, in the same way, I'm curious with respect to the way Krishna communicates with you. Kevin continued, whether it's in a similar kind of way that he gives your necessities. Bali Mardan caught what he was trying to say. In other words, when you decide that when someone is to be in charge of a particular temple, does Krishna tell you that this person should be in charge? Or do you judge him, or do you by judging him say this person is qualified? Kevin added. Yes, Prabhupada replied. Because a devotee always consults Krishna and he gives order. It's a more direct communication. Yes, Prabhupada told him. And he gives order. At this point, Rameshwar came into the conversation again, offering his own realization of the process of communication. Because intelligence, our philosophy is that intelligence comes from Krishna. Try to understand. Suppose my intelligence sees this person as qualified. That means Krishna has told me. Prabhupada stopped him, making it perfectly clear that the process was not indirect. No, not necessarily. Krishna will tell directly. A devotee always consults Krishna and Krishna tells him, do like this, not figuratively. We were all smiling at Prabhupada's unambiguous statement. His answer was firmly based on both Shastra and his own personal experience. Does that apply to other kinds of decisions as well as other kinds of activities as well? Kevin wanted to know. Everything, Prabhupada told him. Because a devotee does not do anything without consulting Krishna. But that applies to a very greatly elevated soul. That is not an ordinary person. Bali Mardan reaffirmed, just to make sure that Kevin didn't get the wrong idea. And Prabhupada added, therefore minor devotees, they consult the spiritual master. That is our process. So, speaking more about that, we can see that Srila Prabhupada, he practically ran his movement because Krishna guided him. It's just everything that Prabhupada did, it's, where he went, what he did. He's in direct communication with Krishna. And we can see how the movement completely flourished, even in sort of inconceivable ways that you would send 3 couples with no experience to London, and then that actually works. How can that work? It's like, it just doesn't make any sense. Now, in the same vein, if you read, I'm doing a little bit of a study, not very blissful, but trying to study a little bit of the history of ISKCON post-Prabhupada, and most of the books, some of the things that you consult are very critical of the 11 zonal gurus who followed Srila Prabhupada. And yes, they did make tremendous mistakes. However, what I'm gathering from there is that I'm seeing more of the point that Guru Maharaj makes, that they weren't trying to be sinister, in the sense that they weren't trying to actually run the movement to the ground. And they did consult people who they thought they should consult based on certain words that Srila Prabhupada made. For instance, they consulted Sridhar Maharaj, who is a very elevated devotee. If you read his articles and things like that, it's quite amazing. Yet, some of the things Sridhar Maharaj advised them, it doesn't seem like Prabhupada would have advised them in the same way, managerially speaking, and for a particular management. For instance, the establishment of I'm getting a lot into details here, but the establishment,
the Acharya board or something.
Exactly, the Acharya board. That was directly coming from him. And what are because disciples, they obviously these devotees weren't in direct communication with Krishna. It can seem very confusing for a devotee who's trying to follow but is not able to get a clear idea of what to do, what should not be done. And what should one do in those kind of circumstances? How does one figure out, especially when the spiritual master is not physically present, as we see in this instance. What?
Well, according, of course, yeah. Well, just to quote the purport I was quoting earlier, by following the orders of the spiritual master, specifically with this exact situation, regarding the disorder of the zonal acharya system, that was not necessarily what Srila Prabhupada intended to establish. And at least, of course, I and us all have the respect, like, what do you call that?
Utmost respect.
Yeah, utmost respect for them. It's not that, like, that's there, but also, like, what do you say? Viewing it in hindsight.
Yeah.
We have the
Advantage.
advantage of viewing it in hindsight. So it may be a sort of distortion, that lens I'm looking through, but it seems quite apparent that Srila Prabhupada didn't necessarily envision establishing only 11 gurus. Although, fractionally, so many times, Srila Prabhupada, he said that he wanted all of his disciples to be spiritual masters. He wanted multiple spiritual masters. I mean, there's so many different quotes. And he didn't necessarily draw up that. So, of course, yeah, so, and it's not necessarily that nobody objected to that, specifically in this situation. There were objections to that system, even by some of the people on the board itself, but it seemed like there was some agenda one way or another. Although, I mean, purity of heart is not that it's all malicious, so to say, but how to say, it's just like mixed devotional service, that's the word. There's devotional service, but it's mixed. And that little bit of mixture can spoil the whole thing. So it's a case of that. Personally, I feel that Srila Prabhupada was quite clear with what he wanted. And there were definitely steps that could have been made to prevent such a thing. Yeah, specifically with that. Another perspective, viewing it, is Ravindra Prabhu, who was involved with the tearing down of the whole system. He said that he could during this time of the Guru reform, which was in the
Late 80s.
Yeah, 80s to like a little early 90s. He said through the whole thing he could feel. Anyway, this is getting into details, but there was a what do you call that? Like a normal meeting of all the temple presidents in North America, just like discussing the affairs in North America. And then at that meeting, it's like the whole issue blew up, and and it became evident that nobody had faith in the system that was established. And anyway, these are all details, but the essence is that Ravindra Sarup, he said in that meeting, he could perceive, and everybody could perceive, others relate similarly, they could perceive how Krishna was directly guiding the movement back on the course. And he relates that, he says the same thing through the whole reform period. So, one vision, I'm saying this because one vision devotees have, or some devotees, specifically Rivics, they think that Krishna's mercy ended, Krishna withdrew his mercy from ISKCON, and Srila Prabhupada's movement after Srila Prabhupada left the planet. Is not necessarily so. It's not that Srila Prabhupada disappeared, so Krishna also disappeared. Krishna is also here. Krishna is also guiding everybody's own individual lives, collectively, individually, and collectively. So that's another thing. Is that the original question was how to understand that the clarity isn't there. Clarity did come about. Even you take it Gaudiya Math to some extent, things are still going on there. Although it's an undesirable situation, the Gaudiya Math and their multifarious forms, they're still there. And Srila Prabhupada even writes in one purport, although these are the most known purports from Chaitanya Charitamrita, he writes in another purport that, I'm very roughly paraphrasing, but all of my godbrothers were all preaching Krishna consciousness in our own style. And we're all following Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, although we're preaching separately. And it's true. So there's different perspectives of looking on things. Of course, ideally, the Gaudiya Math never broke up. Ideally, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's orders were followed. Or maybe not. It's hard to say. If his orders were followed, would Srila Prabhupada have gone to the West to establish the International Society of Krishna Consciousness? It's hard to say. There are many different factors. So that's yet another perspective in looking on it. But yeah, I'll give a more pointed answer. Harikesh Maharaj, I think, or I guess he hadn't taken sannyas then. He asked Srila Prabhupada what Guru calls an awkward question. Basically, he asked Srila Prabhupada in a roundabout way, when you disappear, how do we know what to do? Do we pray to Paramatma? Will he respond? And Srila Prabhupada, he replied that you can do so, but you can't expect direct reciprocation from Paramatma so long you remain impure. If you're pure, you can expect reciprocation from Paramatma. And he'll instruct us. He instructed directly Srila Prabhupada. But so long there's motivated devotional service, we can't expect. I mean, Paramatma, he may do, he may not do. We can't expect like that. So, like that. Another thing, within the same vein, sorry, it's a lengthy reply, but it's a complex question. Again, Ravindra Prabhu, he was wondering, because this whole Zona Acharya system, there's the question, the lingering question of who is a pure devotee? What does it mean to be a pure devotee? How do you judge a pure devotee? And so, he remembers, he has a series of lectures on this topic, but he remembers that he was very seriously praying to understand, because the whole system was based upon this, that the gurus were pure devotees, and the implication was that others are not, or something along these lines. Srila Prabhupada is a pure devotee. To be a guru, you have to be a pure devotee. And so, Srila Prabhupada, anyway, Ravindra Swarup was thinking like this, he was praying like this, and then one day, I think he just so happened to open the fourth canto, and I think it's around this point of, what is it, Paranjana, I think? Something like that, where Srila Prabhupada is speaking about the spiritual master, somewhere around there. And Srila Prabhupada, he defines a pure devotee, I'm paraphrasing, he opened this purport where Srila Prabhupada, he defines a pure devotee, one who purely follows the orders of his spiritual master. One who is purely following his spiritual master, he is also a pure devotee. Even though he may not be in the fully realized stage, he's a pure devotee. Therefore, consequently, he's competent to become also a spiritual master. So specifically, we see this with, it's not that the Paramatma also abandons the devotees. Paramatma is also there. We see, for example, Ravindra Swarup, he strongly felt that Krishna gave him that realization at that point. And he wrote a whole paper on it, and it turned the minds of many devotees. So just some different aspects. Is that okay?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that I felt that was pretty gaping was that sometimes you can't understand just based on what the spiritual master is saying. Especially when the spiritual master is not present, it does seem important that devotees also, which also seems that was the problem, they are not consulting what was done previously, what was done by what was traditionally done, what the previous acharyas did, what is traditionally followed, how are such problems dealt with in a traditional way. Of course, now my motivation in asking this question comes because we are tasked, our generation and the generations following us are tasked with establishing Daiva Varnashram Dharma. And this one is such an uncharted territory that you don't, it's not very clear exactly what should, say, be the rules and regulations of a particular community of devotees. There's some general idea, and you have to try to figure out what is favorable. And, so kind of reflecting on that. But and I wanted to ask this because I felt that there's a little difference between this and what happened in the post-Prabhupada era, is that it seems that there were clear instructions and clear tradition that devotees could have followed, which they somehow ignored doing so, and therefore there was a disaster. Whereas in this case, if we make ample effort to research in that regard and try to do our best, because especially in the West there is no tradition, what do you follow? Hopefully we will be guided and protected in the right way.
It's a sort of a black spot. I mean, there are examples, even within the West, electricity is a recent phenomenon, for example. In terms of so many things, in terms of like how people dealt. People were living within even Sweden, which is I mean, not every part is like that, but some parts they get during their winter, they barely see the sun. It's very cold there, but nevertheless, we see people who are living there. So it's possible, even within the West, although its customs and practice and culture aren't to be exactly encouraged in terms of a practical day-to-day. What grows in this situation? How do people live under such circumstances? Just like you see, for example, there's a way of building houses. There's a way of building large structures. You see mosques, for example, in the Middle East. They're built in such a way as a desert. And mosques, I mean, AC is just a recent invention. So, it's a huge stone building. It's hot like anything inside. And mostly they're closed, actually. So they're built in such a way that the wind can flow through them. Although, anyway, all these things are there. So these things can be consulted. Another thing, succinctly, is throwing yourself at the process and just looking towards the guidance of the spiritual master. One thing is that that was the case much with Srila Prabhupada's disciples. They also started farm communities like that. And even with their preaching, for example, Srila Prabhupada, he sent disciples to England to preach, but what does that mean? To preach is a very vague concept. What does it mean to preach? How will you preach? Where will you go? What will you do? How will people become devotees? They didn't bring any books with them, to my knowledge. They had practically nothing. But something came about. They went there, they tried something, they kept in contact with Srila Prabhupada, and it was difficult for them. If you read their memoirs, it was a very difficult time. They were practically living on the street at one point. It wasn't easy for them, but they kept in touch with Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada guided them, and look what came about. They came in touch with the Beatles, and now, even today, Krishna consciousness is like well established over there. So similarly too, so many things in India. India was a little more concrete because Srila Prabhupada was more involved in the day-to-day affairs, but it was a very vague thing in terms of so many things. Srila Prabhupada, he tasked disciples whose only connection with a magazine was maybe that they had read a magazine a few times in their life, and he passed the task of writing for printing, distributing his Back to Godhead magazine to them. They had no idea how to do it. They had no idea how to print books or anything of that nature. One thing is Srila Prabhupada was inclined towards on-the-job training, and that you just throw somebody in something, and then they figure it out. You see this with so many things. Practically everything. The book distribution, the art which he commissioned, you see a progression in the arts. His artist wanted to take professional training, and Srila Prabhupada, he denied it. He just said, you go on painting, and Krishna will give you the intelligence, and Krishna did. So it may sound very impractical, but it's not a material calculation. But, at least specifically with this, so long as the spiritual master is present, it's good to elicit
of course.
instruction from him as far as possible, like that.
Of course, yeah.
So, is that okay? Anything else? Yes.
Can you clarify a little bit more about this point when Guru Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada also, he gave all the instructions in the books, but sometimes disciples force him to do something whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes, similarly, we have sometimes adjustment, according to place and circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
And how to realize where is the directly his instructions and where is the disciples force him to give these instructions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a good example that comes to my mind, for example, his disciple, Srila Prabhupada, told his disciples in 1966 to chant 64 rounds, but his disciples pushed back, and then it was decreased to 32 and 16 famously, and now that's set. Well, one thing is that Srila Prabhupada, he never relented with that. It means he kept that standard, and he just maintained it. Whereas something like, for example, I was quoting this instance of Srila Prabhupada being pressured to introduce guitars and kirtan. So he may have assented in that situation, but elsewhere he made his desire very, very clear that what he wanted for kirtan, and actually was very strict about it. So in one situation, it's good to have acquaintance with the whole body of his teachings, I would say that, and not just because on a case-by-case basis, the spiritual master may make an adjustment. Srila Prabhupada, our own spiritual master too, some adjustment may be there, but we should see what the general principle is. For example, I don't know, so many things. Srila Prabhupada, we see instances of, for example, one early disciple who her husband divorced her. Srila Prabhupada gave allowance for her to get remarried. But nevertheless, Srila Prabhupada's overall stance was that women should not remarry. He generally encouraged that. So the general thing is that the exception doesn't become, it therefore requires becoming acquainted with exactly like what the spiritual master's exact stance on the subject is, for example. And when there's an exception, well, we can try and understand exactly why, the motivation behind it. That's always there. I mean, Srila Prabhupada made so many exceptions in coming to the West, and it's necessary. It's not that we just rigidly, of course, some things are rigidly followed, other things maybe not so. Had Srila Prabhupada been too rigid when it came to, for example, New York, probably Krishna consciousness would have never taken off. We hear, for example, this point of kirtan, Satrup Das Goswami, he writes in Lilamrita, although Srila Prabhupada was very strict with his later kirtan standards, in 1966 we hear stories of people bringing, Srila Prabhupada, he himself played the bongo drum because there was no mridanga. People would play harmonium with just a drone. They didn't know how to play it. They would just pump it with the bellows out like that. Somebody found the innards of a piano on the street, and they moved it into the storefront, and so people would just play the piano, not even in the same tune. Sometimes people would play the same tune that Srila Prabhupada's saying, sometimes they would just play something completely different. You can hear it on the recordings. There's some crazy kirtans. Nevertheless, Srila Prabhupada, for the sake of preaching, he allowed that. Of course, that's there. Generally, one thing is that we take Srila Prabhupada's standards that he set later in the movement as the standard to come to. Of course, we may not necessarily impose that on new people coming in, but for example, that Srila Prabhupada allowed in 19, as I quoted before, 1962 or 63, Srila Prabhupada was in favor of co-education, but in 1966 he was very much against it. So it's not that we accept an earlier instruction when a later instruction very clearly contradicts it. So, is that okay? It's complex. It can be complex. It can be simple. It can be complex. And another point in general is to see if there's any sort of obscurity or unclear thing, generally it's best to go a conservative route. Generally, at least my Guru Marci encourages like that. And to look to tradition and see what's done historically like that as well. If the spiritual master isn't present or something like that, no authority to consult to see what's been done in the past. So, like that.
Yes, because like Shiva Maharaj told it in his speech about woman Diksha Guru, he told it all the conception is based on like two letters and one conversation, or something, like two conversation on one letter. It's all the conception is like based on all these things. But this is, you can see this became very prominent. Only like a small things, they became like a basis for all the conception. Even you have like also many instructions and the books and the lectures and all this conversation. There's so many information, but they try to neglect only by these three things like.
Yeah, I'll just speak briefly on that. There's something called hermeneutics, which is like basically like, how do you define it? It's something like how you know, not exactly epistemology, but it's like ways of understanding or ways of interpretation. So, for example, this thing of levels of authorities, that's more clear. For example, Srila Prabhupada's books are to be taken, they're much more authoritative than, say, his conversations with devotees. And Srila Prabhupada's conversations with devotees are much more authoritative than Srila Prabhupada's conversation with non-devotees. Sometimes, which one of these conversations constitute Srila Prabhupada speaking to a reporter. Sometimes, according to a very conservative idea of Krishna consciousness, Srila Prabhupada, he may say something that seems like a little like strange or out there to a non-devotee for the sake of preaching, for the sake of presenting the message of Krishna consciousness. Sometimes it's like that. Whereas internally, he may give a different instruction. So it is a little technical matter, but there's also another thing. Seeing exactly where the pramana is coming from, in other words, it's like that. So, yeah. Mataji's, any questions? No? Okay. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.